Step outside tomorrow morning anywhere in North America. The biggest animal you're likely to meet is a deer. Maybe a moose, if you're unlucky. Now rewind 15,000 years. Same ground, same weather, roughly. Same trees, and moving through them. Mammoths. Ground sloths the size of a minivan, standing on their back legs to strip leaves off the high branches. Beavers as big as black bears. Lions heavier than the ones in Africa today. An armadillo you could park a scooter under. Every single one of them is gone. Not rare, not hiding in some valley nobody's checked. Gone. And they went in a window so narrow it barely shows up in geological time. So what actually happened out there? This is one of the biggest unsolved cases in the history of life on Earth. And there are exactly two suspects. Suspect 1, the climate. The last ice age was ending. The world was warming. The ice was pulling back. Everything was in motion. Suspect 2, you. Scientists have been arguing about which one did it for around 60 years, and they are still arguing. And the honest answer is stranger than either side wants it to be. It's also more uncomfortable. You almost never get it in a documentary. So let's do this properly. Evidence for the prosecution. Evidence for the defense. Then a verdict, and you can fight me on it afterwards. Start with the version you've probably heard. The ice age ended, it got warm, the big furry animals couldn't cope, and they quietly faded out. Sad. Natural. Nobody's fault. There's a problem with that story. It's a large one. The last couple of million years were not one long freeze. They were a metronome. Cold, warm, over and over. Ice sheets grew, collapsed, grew again. And the giants lived through all of it. Mammoths lived through it. Ground sloths lived through it. The enormous marsupials of Australia lived through it. These were not fragile animals. They were the ones built for the hard version of the planet. Thick coats, huge bodies, the whole package. They had been handed this exact test dozens of times, and dozens of times they passed it. Which raises a question nobody has a comfortable answer to. Why did this warm-up kill them, when every warm-up before it didn't? Something was different about the last one. Something new had turned up. Okay, this is where it gets weird. If a global climate shift wiped out the big animals, the extinctions should land everywhere at roughly the same time. That's what global means. One planet, one thermostat, one very bad century for everybody. That is not what the record shows. It isn't close. Australia loses most of its giants somewhere around 40 to 50,000 years ago. The wombat the size of a car. The kangaroo that stood taller than you. A lizard you really would not want to meet. North and South America lose theirs about 13,000 years ago. That's roughly 30,000 years later. Different continent, different date, same disappearance. Madagascar keeps its elephant birds and its lemurs the size of gorillas until a couple of thousand years ago. New Zealand keeps the moa, a bird taller than a man, until around 700 years ago. 700. There were universities in Europe while those birds were still walking around. 4 different places. 4 wildly different dates. One global thermostat cannot produce that pattern. It physically can't. But something else can. Line those dates up against the earliest solid evidence of people arriving in each place. And they track. Not perfectly. The dating on some of this is genuinely messy, and archaeologists argue about individual sites constantly. But the shape is there, and it does not go away when you push on it. Wherever we turn up, a few thousand years later, the big animals stop turning up, which could be a coincidence. 4 separate times. And there's a footnote to all of this that I can't stop thinking about. The mammoths didn't all go at 13,000 years ago. A small population hung on, way up in the Arctic, on an island almost nobody had ever reached. They were still there, still alive, still breathing, still eating, while people in Egypt were stacking stone blocks into pyramids. Read that again. There were mammoths on Earth during the Bronze Age. Why that last group finally went is its own argument, and a messy one. A tiny herd on a small island, inbreeding, running low on luck. But the timing is hard to ignore. The last of them survived longest in the one place we hadn't got to yet. Here's the part nobody puts in the textbooks. This extinction didn't sort animals by where they lived. It sorted them by how much they weighed. In North America, almost everything over about 100 pounds disappeared. Almost everything under it stayed. Same forests, same grasslands, same shifting weather. And the small animals just carried on with their lives. Rabbits? Fine. Squirrels? Fine. Deer? Mostly fine. And the list of things that vanished reads like somebody rated a fantasy novel. A bear that stood taller than a doorway. An armored animal the size of a small car with a club on its tail. A camel. An actual camel, in Wyoming. All gone. Meanwhile, the raccoon, an animal whose entire strategy is being annoying near garbage, sailed straight through. Think about what that means. Climate change is a blunt instrument. When a habitat falls apart, it takes what's living in it, big things and small things together. It doesn't check the scale on the way in. A hunter checks the scale. A hunter has always checked the scale. If you're going to spend a whole day and risk your life on one animal, you pick the one that feeds 30 people, not the one that feeds one. And then there's Africa. Africa still has its giants. Elephants, rhinos, hippos, giraffes. It's the last place on Earth that still looks a little like the world used to look everywhere else. So why did Africa get to keep them? The leading explanation is elegant and slightly chilling. Africa is where we came from. Those animals spent millions of years living alongside our ancestors, watching us get slowly, steadily better at killing things. They had time. They learned to be afraid of us, the same way they learned to be afraid of lions. An animal in Australia, meeting a human for the first time, had no reason to run. Nothing in its history had ever taught it that this small, slow, weird-looking thing was dangerous. It just stood there and watched us walk up. That's a hypothesis, by the way, not a proven fact. Nobody can interview a mammoth about its feelings. But it's the best explanation anyone's got for why one continent still has monsters and the rest of us have deer. Stay with me, because this is the good part. You're probably picturing a slaughter. A line of hunters, spears everywhere, mammoths going down by the dozen. Drop that picture. You don't need it, and it probably never happened. A mammoth was pregnant for something like 22 months. We're inferring that from elephants, its closest living relatives, so treat it as an estimate. Almost 2 years, and at the end of it, one calf. One. Then years of raising that calf before it can have one of its own. An animal that reproduces that slowly has no margin. None. It can't absorb losses the way a rabbit can. Population models suggest something quiet and awful. A small human population, taking a handful of animals a year, could push a species like that all the way down over a few centuries. I want to be careful with that. Those are models, not something anybody dug out of the ground. But the arithmetic works, and it doesn't need a war. It needs a trickle. Now think about what a trickle looks like from the inside. You hunt the way your father hunted. Your son hunts the way you did. Nobody in that chain ever watches the population fall, because it falls slower than a human life. Every generation looks around at whatever's left and thinks, this is normal. This is how many there have always been. Modern conservation has a name for that. Shifting baselines. Every generation quietly accepts a smaller world than the one before, because a smaller world is the only one they've ever seen, which means nobody in this story is a villain. There's no bad guy to point at. There's just a very long line of people feeding their kids. That's the part that's hard to look at. Let that sit for a second. Now, if we're doing this honestly, and honesty is the whole point, the case against us has holes in it, real ones. Here's the biggest. If people hunted the mammoths of North America out of existence, there should be evidence. Kill sites. Butchered bones with stone tools sitting next to them. Archaeologists have been digging that continent for well over a century, specifically looking for exactly this. The number of confirmed sites is a few dozen. A few dozen. One entire continent. Thousands of years. That's not a massacre. That's barely a rumor. And the researchers who back the climate suspect point at that number and ask a completely fair question. Where are the bodies? There's an answer, and it's frustrating. Almost every kill leaves nothing behind. Bones get scattered, chewed, weathered, buried, dissolved. The odds that one dead animal survives 13,000 years and then gets found by someone holding a trowel are close to zero. But the evidence would be invisible is a weak thing to build a case on, and everybody in that argument knows it. Meanwhile, the climate suspect has a real motive. The end of the last ice age was not a gentle spring morning. Grasslands turned into forest. Rivers moved. The specific mix of plants that kept a mammoth alive got broken up and scattered. The landscape stopped working the way it used to. For an animal that eats a few 100 pounds of vegetation a day, that is not a minor inconvenience. So which one did it? Probably both. And that isn't a cop-out. It's the actual shape of the argument now. Picture a species already squeezed. Its range is shrinking. Its herds are splitting up. Its calves are harder to raise. It has survived this before. It would probably have survived it again. Then add one more pressure. Small, constant, patient. A few animals a year, taken by the only predator on Earth that makes plans. The climate walked them to the edge. We were the small, steady weight that kept them there. Here's the thing that stayed with me. Go for a walk somewhere with old trees. Some of what you're looking at is still built for animals that aren't there anymore. There are trees in the Americas that grow fruit far too big for any living animal to swallow and carry off. Avocados, Osage oranges, a green, wrinkled, brain-looking thing the size of a softball. Every autumn it drops on the ground and rots. Nothing alive particularly wants it. Honey locusts with thorns long enough to go through a boot, guarding bark from mouths that stopped existing. The best guess is that those trees are still doing business with partners who died out. Nobody told them. Trees are slow. 10,000 years isn't long enough to get the message. That's a hypothesis too. Settled fact. But once you've heard it, you don't walk through a forest quite the same way. They didn't know what they were doing. That's the part worth holding on to. There was no meeting, no decision, no moment where anybody looked at a mammoth and chose this. Just people feeding their families, generation after generation, off animals that were quietly running out, and a world that got emptier so slowly, nobody ever heard the silence arrive. We're better at noticing now. We're not always better at stopping, but we notice, taking a little more than gets replaced, and never quite seeing it happen. That didn't die out with them. 300,000 years later, you're still doing it. Funny how that works. So give me your verdict. Climate, us, or both? And how sure are you? Tell me in the comments.